Let us all drink in how monumental a task Endwalker is for Creative Business Unit 3. I doubt that many people watching this right now were there that day that Yoshi P launched his nuke at the game, eradicating it to bring from those ashes A Realm Reborn. 11 years ago, August 2013 is when this fresh journey begun, and now it must come to an end. And I imagine that most of you watching this who joined later were told over and over again when your friends or colleagues were trying to entice you in, story, story, story. This story is so beloved, so cared for that you have to enjoy it. It's going to be amazing. I rated Heavensward and Shadowbringers as 2 of the top 5 RPG, and I'm not talking just MMO, RPG stories ever told in video games. And now 11 years later, they have the task of bringing it all to an end. Advertised loud and clear for all to know, Endwalker is going to bring it all to a conclusion and move the game in a new direction. This is exciting and terrifying. The story they're concluding is responsible for so many tears, laughs, memories, theories, and never-ending discussions, forming one of the most loyal fan bases of all time. FF14 is known for its incredibly welcoming, heartwarming community and friendly atmosphere. However, disrespecting the main story quest, the MSQ, or not loving one of the scions, one of the main characters, and that super friendly, welcoming fanbase is likely to burst into your home at Christmas and set the whole thing on fire. Endwalker. This one's tricky because Endwalker is essentially two parts. You've got the beginning, which is your MSQ, and then you've got your second half, Post MSQ, the new journey, the new path. As such, whether you like this side or this side, opinions are going to vary wildly. Some people like both, some people like this bit, and some people don't like this bit. And then that's going to lead to a lot of frustration and disappointment with parts of the game. And we'll get to that bit shortly. Let's get into the low poly grapes and male Vieira the expansion launched with. It would be hard to find many who actively dislike the MSQ, or disliked this one, which in and of itself is phenomenal. Media in general is renowned for not satisfying its audience with their conclusions. It's a problem spanning multiple genres and the whole array of storytelling mediums, from TV to video games, from Game of Thrones to Lost, and from Lost to Seinfeld. The end of an era is often not what audiences expected or desired or dreamt up, and can leave them with that lingering frustrations of how they would have ended it. Endwalker surpassed these expectations, with most conversations arguing as to whether it was better than Shadowbringers. Was it one of the best stories ever told or not? Even deeper than that, did the Endwalker MSQ simply make Shadowbringers even better? We've discussed it in detail, but Meteion for me never quite matched Emmet Selk, despite her and Hermes having clear sympathetic values just as Emmet did. She's so blatantly going to be the antagonist from her very first interaction that it didn't have me waiting for her overall character development, just her turn to the eventual dark side. Elpis was a surprise no one could have expected. The relationship explored of Emmet, Vanar, and Hythlodaeus is a highlight for everybody. Garlemald, for me, is utterly outstanding in its simple yet soul-crushing portrayal of a once great society reduced to a shell of them former selves. Defeating Zodiac, the long-renowned big bad so early, completely threw people's fan theories into shambles. They had plenty of time to roll along with the actual ending without constantly waiting for their fan theories to come true. Remarkably clever story writing and pacing, almost perfectly designed for such an invested audience, especially those who have written the ending of this tale in their heads months, if not years ago. Loporitz gave everything a much needed levity, while mixing in the resolution of story threads that had been hot community topics. Urianje's resolution with Moonbreeder's parents no doubt brought many people into despair of Meteion herself. As the whispers played on the Warrior of Light's final footsteps of the MSQ, and the ending of this decade-long journey was in sight. It would be difficult for anyone to argue that CBU 3 over-delivered on expectations. If this review ended there, then Endwalker would deserve an S rank for its story alone. But as with all MMO journeys, it doesn't end there. It shouldn't be discounted. The additions of Reaper and Sage, super well received. People really liked it, and they made good choices with this. Changing Alphinaud to a Sage immediately brought him a more maturity and made the one super nerd who was painting naked pictures of Y'shtola a little bit cooler, right? And also it helped out Xenos. Reaper is a badass job, it simply is, and Xenos is a character with a mixed reception. I'm a Xenos lover. He can be combat sexual with me all day, every day. But not everybody feels the same way, right? And Reaper gave him a new lease on life and a new flair. But here, my friends, here is where that journey takes a fork. Because now we are unfortunately all suffering, ladies included, from post-nut clarity. The Hydaelyn Zodiac storyline has come to an end. And the shininess is wearing off. Everybody will always tell you, when a new MMO is coming out, it's generally always a good thing to jump in. Even for the price of buying a new game, you're probably going to get 2 or 3 months out because new jobs, new quest lines, new side quests, new this, new that, everything's shiny, new raids, new things to explore and all that fun. But then, depending on the player, a couple of months down the line, sometimes it's longer, you start to see the details. And that's when things change. So let's get the Post MSQ out of the way now before we get down to the nuts and bolts. The callback to FF4 was great. It's my favorite. It had so much potential twists and turns with Golbears, Zero, Cecilia, and CBU 3 did plenty to push that speculation as to what was really going on. Its downfall was that it didn't, and could never, ever carry the weight of the previous MSQ editions because the grim darkness of Zodiac and Hydaelyn was finished. Filler is a word that gets tossed around plenty in regards to the post MSQ of Endwalker. Just something to tide people over until Dawntrail and having no bearing on the big picture. Personally, I find this ridiculous. We don't know what the big picture is yet, and to suspect the story writers of FF14 of all people don't know what they're doing is really dismissive. Zero and Golbears fall into the same box as the Warriors of Darkness all those years ago. At the time, they too seemed somewhat throwaway and pointless, but we all know how that turned out. I doubt anyone here thinks Fordola and Arenvald aren't going to make their presence known again in the future, but as their arc takes place amongst the old story arc, it's not considered filler by anyone. The post MSQ was used, in my opinion, to get the story and development of what will be important characters done now, so that later it's not needed in the middle of the main story. In Zero's case, we now have a character that has been completely altered by witnessing the positive actions of the Scions on the general populace. No doubt, when the Scions doubt themselves, they will rely on the once closed off and distant Zero to remind them of what they've done and their true path. I don't believe that any story told in FF14 is wasted, and as of now, and at least since A Realm Reborn, I have no reason to believe that that's the case this time. That's not to say that I don't understand why people didn't feel as strongly about it as they had in the past. After all, the emotional weight of Endwalker, it took a decade to achieve. A fresh tale needs time to find its legs. However, beyond all those things, the biggest criticism we've seen of Endwalker, certainly now, is that it lacks that daily grip, that reason to log in just to play. And we've seen this from content creators and a lot of the community being outspoken that there's just not much to do compared to what I used to do in other expansions. Now, a lot of people have said there's a lack of content. So let's take a closer look at that. Welcome back to school. Let's consider expansion content and what's in there. The raids, they're all there. In fact, Pandemonium had as good a story as we expect from Omega, Alexander, Eden, it doesn't matter. But all the raiders then started to encounter another problem. You see, Final Fantasy XIV, as I'm sure many of you know, works on a very homogeneous job style. Yeah, they have slightly different resources and different abilities, but overall, the big picture, they all kind of work the same. And that allows CBU3 to make some very simple decisions. They can balance things way, way easier. They don't have to worry about multiple talent setups, crazy gear setups, or anything like that. However, players do like having some nice differences between their jobs. When it came to the raiding, the biggest feedback I got from all the raiders was the horror of the 2-minute window. Now, if you're not a raider, this might not make sense to you. So we have 0, 4 minutes, and right in the middle, 2. So what's the 2-minute window? It's actually pretty simple. Cooldowns, big DPS cooldowns or tanking cooldowns or whatever you have on your character are designed to be used sparingly, right? You use them whenever they're available and they give you a big boost to your character's performance. The problem was in Endwalker, and became even more obvious with the ultimates, so we had Omega and DSR, is that these cooldowns do tremendous amounts of damage. And in an MMO, when you put them all together, so let's say you have this window where your cooldowns will be up somewhere in there, in here, if you do things like my character does more crit, another character has a thing where the boss takes more damage. More damn. And then somebody else has a cooldown that gives you haste. All these things stack up together on top of each other. So you then multiply that by like 8 characters, and what you see is a DPS graph that suddenly goes like this. If you don't fit into this area, then in fact, you're just becoming a detriment to the team. And that's the simple fact. If your DPS cooldowns are here, then it goes, or if your DPS cooldowns are here, you go, and this one gets shorter. And so what happened was, any jobs that didn't fit inside here got abandoned. And so CBU3 was presented with the problem, because this is a real problem when you have massive DPS checks on boss encounters and you can cut entire phases out of fights. Simple as that. And so they made the decision, we'll just make everybody 2 minutes. Now, why is that a problem? Because it also makes every single fight the same. It's all about 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. And now every single raider will tell you that most of the planning goes into when do we use our 2 minutes. And it's tedious and it's tiresome. And that homogeneity that exists in FF14 may only get worse. Of course, we've got Pictomancer and Viper coming in Dawntrail, and they're not very happy. However, if we look at some other content, the Beast Tribes, for example, when compared to the frustrations people have, the pets, the mounts, all the cosmetics were up to an S-class tier. So let's take a closer look. Let's go somewhere a bit special and really find out about this lack of content. Welcome to all the things that make up an expansion in a typical Final Fantasy XIV setting. Here we can really compare old expansions, new expansions, and all the features that make them up. Let's start with one of the obvious ones people complain about with Endwalker, and that is the lack of a raid trial series. These would be your Wurlits, your Four Lords, and of course, your Warring Triad. Now, this didn't exist in Endwalker. Or did it? Well, yes, it did. But they decided to make a change. They decided to split it in 2. On the one hand, we had the bosses. And these were sent off to the MSQ. And you might wonder why. They were perfectly fine the way they were. They were unique, interesting stories, all leading to bosses. Well, the likely reason is, after dealing with a lot of MMO companies, just not enough people were doing them to justify the expense of creating them. A lot of people join FF14 and just play the MSQ and then log out. They don't even know, in some cases, that the raid series and extra stories exist. But what about the actual story element itself then? Where did that go, Mike? Well, actually, this time around, it was moved over to Tataru. Her adventures and our adventures of visiting a lot of old faces across Aetherius and seeing what they were up to and giving you that extra storyline to go along with. So the story and the raid series and the bosses do exist, but change in an MMO is very dangerous. People like what they like. A lot of old elements came back to life. Hildebrand, who hadn't been seen for a while, brought back into the game itself. And of course, alongside that, much to the love of the community, the Blue Mage, brought back as well. Even more content. But above that, new sparks were created. Criterion Dungeons. CBU3's answer to a lot of the West joining FF14 and demanding what they had seen in other games. Low group counts, really hard challenging content, and they delivered. The Criterion dungeons did provide that, as well as still being suitable for casual players. However, no reason whatsoever to farm them. And then we had another new idea. Island Adventures. So exciting. In the FF14 world, we're getting the Stardew Valley Animal Crossing style simulator, and people were so excited. In fact, Island Adventures were one of the things I was so excited for. I'd never tried those kind of games, but to do it in 14, sure, and I played the life out of it. This was the first time in 14 I've actively farmed something. But unfortunately, it very quickly turned into a spreadsheet simulator that none of us wanted. And it died, just as my love of it died. The one thing about Final Fantasy XIV and CBU3 is they're going to iterate and keep growing on it. More Criterion dungeons are coming, still no real reason to farm it. And we know that we're going to be traveling the stars in Dawntrail with the next iteration of what Island Adventures will be. And Endwalker didn't stop there. Ishgardian Housing. That joined us. We also got Data Center Travel. That joined us as well. And we got a brand new deep dungeon to go along with it. And the Crystalline Conflict joined us as well. Endwalker brought with it, as you can see, tons and tons of content and features. Several of them brand new. So when players are saying there's just not enough content, what exactly are they talking about? Well, we discussed the change of the norm in some cases. This is always going to be upsetting, but the big one people bring up is the Relic grind, especially when compared to Eureka and my personal favourite, Bosnia. At this point, we should talk about the elephant in the room, Final Fantasy XVI. Many have decried the team's involvement on 16 as the reason for a big hole existing in 14's Endwalker. Yoshi P already has a very busy schedule, so adding 16 to his plate is definitely going to affect something. More clearly, Yoshi P made it very, very loud and clear he actively wanted people to be able to complete their favourite activities in 14 in a nice, timely manner in order to free people up to play 16. You might remember the live letter of him discussing reducing the gearing process for raiding for this exact reason. No doubt the Relic grind was under similar scrutiny. In the past, it was common that your first relic would be relatively easily obtainable, but then collecting them all for all the jobs would be a long-term endeavour. Endwalker has literally no long-term goals, and that is poison for the people who just want to play their favourite game. While it's easy to say, hey, just go play other games, including the game director himself, the reality is there are many people who just don't want to, and a monthly paid MMO should also be catering to those people. The Endwalker Relic Hunt was reduced to simply farming tomestones, not that many of them either, and just getting the relics given to you. Now this has a twofold effect. Firstly, obtaining them is not only easy, but also boring, as you aren't doing some niche separate piece of content with its own pros and cons like Bosnia, but instead you're just doing dungeons and journals as you would ordinarily do and hunting across the plains. Secondly, it makes the relics mundane. Nothing is special if everybody has it. Relic collections were previously a badge of honour for the day-to-day players. Seeing their jobs with the harder-to-grind relics felt so rewarding, and you knew that not many players could have achieved what you had done. Yet now, it means nothing. Back in World of Warcraft's Legion expansion, a weapon known as Ashbringer, a legendary sword that had its own fanfiction, crackpot theories, was suddenly just equipped by anyone who happened to play a paladin. All spectacle and mystery of the weapon was suddenly lost to the ether. For many, this was a gap in the game that nothing could fill, and while we could entirely shift the blame to FF16, it should be considered there are now so many jobs in the game that having huge long grinds for completionists is somewhat becoming untenable. There are 2 more jobs coming in Dawntrail. The next version of this relic content which we know is coming, well, it may never be what you hope it would be. As we move away from Endwalker, and as someone who wasn't looking to play it every single day, I have to say I had a blast. It's an A rank for me. But it had its problems. Criterion dungeons were great until they weren't. Island adventures were amazing until they weren't. But I'm still so happy to see that they kept trying new things while maintaining a lot of the old school things. But now we turn to Dawntrail. And which path will they take? I don't think anything will ever beat Shadowbringers for me. The Post MSQ had mixed reaction. So whatever they do to launch Dawntrail with, it has to be an absolute banger. But I have the utmost faith in their storytelling. I know for one that when it launches, I'll be getting my brush out and pictomancing immediately. And then I'll do the MSQ a little later after you guys have had your fill. But wherever we go, we're going to have a good time. I choose this way. And what you see is a DPS graph that suddenly goes like this. And what you don't see, no. It was too tempting. And the thing was, 3, 2, 1. And the thing is, if you didn't fit into, it is at the top. 3.
Just have it loop around his 2 testicles.
3, 2, 1. If you didn't fit into... I need to get out of this. Alright. Alright. 3.
We're very serious and professional.
3. Aww. That is what happens. I'm not lying. And so what happened was